Hello and thank you for joining us. My name is Ben Sheen. I'm a managing editor here at Stratfor. I'm joined today by Latin America analyst Reggie Thompson, and we'll be talking about the ongoing protests in Peru. So Reggie, we obviously track a lot of countries in South America: Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia. Peru is on our radar right now. I guess the questions I have is, why is it on the radar and what's going on?
So really the main thing going on right now in Peru is a growing protest movement in the southern region of the country against mining interests. Now, it began as a very isolated case of a very specific group with a very specific grievance against a mining project. In this case, it was environmental groups in the province of Islay in Arequipa, and they were essentially protesting over the possible environmental damage that would be caused by the Tia Maria copper mining project, which is currently planned. It hasn't received its environmental permitting yet. And that mining project was put on hold for a while, and these protest groups began demonstrating against the mining project. And now the mining project is on hold again for 60 days as a result of these demonstrations. Now, it's an example of an isolated grievance coalescing into numerous leftist organizations and numerous environmental groups, everything from old Communist Party members, other mining groups, artisanal miners from the south, from the Puno region, and local political groupings that are not affiliated with the major political parties in the country, in Congress, for example. So this is a very widespread, very broad-based movement, but it has resulted in a very widespread strike, very widespread protest movement on the 27th and the 28th of May that has essentially paralyzed some labor activities in the southern region of the country. And so obviously the wider implications are for investment in Peru. We care about this primarily because of the effect that it could have on the investment climate going forward and whether investors start reconsidering future mining investments into Peru, particularly in the copper and in the iron ore deposits there. And that could have consequences for Peru's bottom line down the road.
Now, that was actually my next question, which is, what are the implications of this? Because who are the investors? Are they mainly from Latin America, or are they from outside or even North America?
So some of the investors are obviously from Latin America. The Southern Copper Project, the Tia Maria project, for example, that has sparked all these protests. That's a Grupo Mexico-owned, Mexican-owned project. But there are other investors, for example, American investors, Chinese investors in particular have snapped up some projects there, like the Las Bambas project and the Shugang iron ore project. So we've been seeing these investors flocking to Peru over the past decade because of the benign investment climate there, as opposed to neighboring Bolivia, where expropriation was the norm for a while in how the Bolivian President Evo Morales dealt with labor disputes between companies and local workers. And so Peru has had a more benign investment climate. Companies have been assured of their investments, and this has pretty much led to a boom in mining investment over the past decade as mineral prices were high, spurred by increased global demand, particularly from China for things like copper, for iron ore, and for other minerals. And so the risk with these protests right now around these projects is that we could end up seeing some of this sentiment, some of this investor sentiment shifting towards investments in other countries in Latin America, or not making the investments in Peru at all, simply because of the risk of protest. Obviously, what's driving a lot of these protests is the dynamic of the periphery against the center in Peru, the Lima elite that have for centuries really relied on extractive industries, like mining and things like that, against this periphery. Some of these, the largely poor indigenous interior has often protested to get their demands across. With an election coming up in the next year, a lot of these groups are going to be jockeying for power, trying to make their voices heard. But specific grievances like this do have the tendency to get out of hand sometimes at politically sensitive times, such as before elections. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see a few more months of demonstrations going forward.
So, Reggie, to conclude, what do you think will happen? Clearly, it benefits the government and the investors in the mining companies to try and resolve this as quickly as possible. What do we foresee here?
Well, starting on May 16th, we saw a 60-day suspension on the Tia Maria mining project implemented by the Peruvian government. So what's going to happen right now is that the Peruvian government is going to attempt to get the two sides, the protesters and the mining company, Southern Copper, to sit down and essentially negotiate a solution, to negotiate a compromise to this. The thing is, from the degree of violence and the degree of just the pace of the protest that we've seen, the protesters are very clearly trying to press their advantage against the mining company in an effort to get the contract canceled, in an effort to get this mining company to essentially leave, pack up their operations and leave. Now, what is likely going to happen is we're going to see the negotiations occur, but a lot of this is going to depend on whether or not the groups really want to negotiate. But from what it looks like now, it seems that the groups are protesting are being very tenacious. They're really digging in, and they're really holding violent protests, roadblocks, particularly in the Arequipa area. And it seems like these are set to continue.
Well, Reggie, it seems like a very tense and dynamic situation, but one we'll be tracking very closely. Thank you for joining me today. For more on Peru and Latin America in general, please continue to read stratfor.com.